History of the formation of nations in the world. The history of the United States. Even if the United States of America emerged as an independent country after 1776 and recognized in 1783, the history of these lands is deeper than that. Thousands of years ago, the first people settled in the American continent. It is not exactly known how the Native Americans first settled in these territories, but a theory says that people migrated from Eurasia starting 30,000 years ago. Across a land bridge known as Beringia, this connected Siberia to North America during the Ice Age. This migration continued until 10,000 years ago. At that time, a glacial period ended, and the land bridge became submerged by the rising ocean. The early inhabitants were called the Paleo-Americans. In time, they migrated even deeper in Americas, and they formed tribes and nations. They created interesting civilizations, developing their own culture. Among the cultures that existed here, we can mention Adena culture, Iroquois culture, Coles Creek culture, Puebloan culture, and Mississippian culture, but another part of today. The United States has an interesting and different history. Speaking about Hawaii, this land wasn't inhabited until the 1st centuries AD. Native development started with the settlement of Polynesian people between the 1st and 10th centuries, starting in the 15th century. European colonization began. In 1492, a Spanish expedition headed by the Italian explorer Christopher Columbus sailed west to find a new trade route to the Far East, but landed in what came to be known to Europeans as the New World. After this event, in the next decades, more and more ships sailed west to establish colonies and trade posts. The Spaniards began building their American empire, using islands such as Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Hispaniola as bases. They expanded hugely. France founded colonies in eastern North America, a number of Caribbean islands, and small coastal parts of South America. Portugal colonized Brazil. The eastern seacoast was settled primarily by English colonists in the 17th century, along with a much smaller number of Dutch and Swedes. The first successful English colony, Jamestown, was established in 1607 on the James River in Virginia. New wave of settlers arrived in the late 17th century and established commercial agriculture based on tobacco. Even though there were some conflicts between the Native Americans and English settlers, the colonies managed to expand pretty fast, and more people settled in. Each of the 13 American colonies had slightly different governmental structure. In fact, a colony was ruled by a governor appointed from London. This governor controlled the administration and relied upon a locally elected legislature to vote taxes and make laws. By the 18th century, the American colonies were growing very rapidly, and as a result of low death rates, along with ample supplies of land and food, this attracted a heavy flow of immigrants. The tobacco and rice plantations imported African slaves for labor from the British colonies in the West Indies, and by the 1770s, African slaves comprised a fifth of the American population. The question of independence from Britain did not arise as long as the colonies needed British military support against the French and Spanish powers. The French and Indian War was an event created by the political development of the colonies. It was also part of the larger 7 Years' War. Britain beat French forces, and France lost their colonies and territories in Canada and Louisiana. The war was costly, and Britain needed money. The British Parliament passed the Stamp Act of 1765, imposing a tax on the colonies without going through the colonial legislatures. The issue was drawn. Did Parliament have this right to tax Americans who were not represented in it? Crying. No taxation without representation. The colonists refused to pay the taxes as tensions escalated in the late 1760s and early 1770s. The Boston Tea Party in 1773 was marked as the start of the Revolution. It happened in the town of Boston to protest against the new tax on tea. Parliament quickly responded the next year with the Coercive Acts, stripping Massachusetts of its historic right of self-government and putting it under army rule, which sparked outrage and resistance in all 13 colonies. Leaders from all 13 colonies gathered and created the First Continental Congress to coordinate their resistance. The Congress called for a boycott of British trade, published a list of rights and grievances, and petitioned the king for redress of those grievances. It wasn't about independence at that point, but this appeal had no effect, and petitioned the king for redress of those grievances. It wasn't about independence at that point, but this appeal had no effect. And so the Second Continental Congress was created in 1775 in order to organize the defense of the colonies against the British Army. The 13 colonies began a rebellion against British rule in 1775 and proclaimed their independence in 1776 as the United States of America. In the American Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1783, the Americans captured the British invasion army at Saratoga in 1777, secured the Northeast, and encouraged the French to make a military alliance with the United States. France brought in Spain and the Netherlands, thus balancing the military and naval forces on each side. As Britain had no allies, General George Washington was an excellent organizer and administrator who worked successfully with Congress and the state governors, selecting and mentoring his senior officers, supporting and training his troops, and maintaining an idealistic Republican army. The American Revolution was a success, and at the Peace of Paris of 1783, their independence was recognized, and even so, the former colonies gained more than expected. The expansion to the west started, incorporating the Amerindian lands. West of the Appalachian Mountains, a deal was made by the United States President Thomas Jefferson in 1803. He bought the Louisiana Territory from France. Initial diplomats sent to France were allowed to spend up to $10 million in order to buy just New Orleans, and if possible, the west bank of the Mississippi River. But the French government said that for $5 million more, all of the Louisiana Territory would be sold. The president approved the deal, and the U.S. doubled its size. In the middle of the 19th century, some cessions were happening, and Texas, in joining the Union in 1845, and after the war against Mexican Empire, the United States will take important lands and expand even further. In 1861, after Abraham Lincoln was elected, Empire, the United States will take important lands and expand even further. In 1861, after Abraham Lincoln was elected, some states from the South, the Confederation, attacked the rest. The South Revolt was happening due to controversy over the enslavement of black people. In 1860, the United States was led by Abraham Lincoln, supporting banning slavery in all territories. War broke out in April 1861, when secessionist forces attacked Fort Sumter in South Carolina. After 4 years of war, the Union achieved its victory, and the Confederates were defeated. National unity was slowly restored. The national government expanded its power. The 19th century was a period of economic expansion. More and more industries were created, and also the accent was put on infrastructure. In 1898, the American-Spanish War is happening. Americans are winning in short-term some battles, and at the Treaty of Paris, U.S. is getting the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam. At the beginning of the 20th century, World War I started, even though the US was neutral, due to German attacks on the American ships, and due to their intentions to make Mexico join against the US. The Americans joined the Allies. After this event, the economy was growing, and all was good, until the Great Depression, which started in 1929. This event shook the world and created a base on which the Second World War will start. United States joined the Allies after being attacked at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, by the Japanese Empire. Americans fought a distant war in Europe, Pacific, and they provided supplies to the Soviets, armored cars, motorized equipment, food, etc., winning battle by battle in the Pacific, getting closer to the Japanese mainland, and after D-Day in Europe in 1944. The Americans managed to have a great impact and to help a lot on the Allied side. The war ended in 1945. Germany capitulated in May, and Japan in September after the 2 nuclear bombs dropped at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The United States and Soviet Union emerged as rival superpowers in the aftermath of World War II. This was a period known as the Cold War. The two countries confronted each other indirectly in the arms race. Proxy wars across the world, including the Korean and Vietnam Wars, and propaganda campaigns. The purpose of this was to stop the spread of communism. In the 1960s, waves of civil rights movements started. Rights of voting and freedom of movement to African Americans and other racial minorities. The Cold War ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union. After, the United States has been focusing on modern conflicts in the Middle East. The beginning of the 21st century saw the September 11th attacks carried out by Al-Qaeda in 2001, which was later followed by the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. In 2008, the United States had its worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. The history of Turkey, from this title, we can understand as the period between the formation of the Republic in 29th October 1923 and the present days, or the period of known history of this land, practically the history of the region now forming the territory of not only the Republic of Turkey, but also Anatolia. The earliest representations of culture in Anatolia were some Stone Age artifacts. Due to its strategic location at the intersection of Asia and Europe, Anatolia has been an important place of several civilizations since prehistoric times. At the start of the Bronze Age, metallurgy spread to Anatolia from Trans-Caucasian cultures in the late 4th millennium BCE, and it slowly entered in the sphere of influence of the Akkadian Empire. Many civilizations existed here. Speaking about one, the Hittite civilization was a member of an ancient Indo-European people who appeared in Anatolia at the beginning of the 2nd millennium BCE. By 1340 BCE, they had become one of the dominant powers in the Middle East. The remnants of Bronze Age civilizations, such as the Haitian, Akkadian, Assyrian, and Hittite peoples, provide us with many examples of the daily lives of its citizens and their trade. After the fall of the Hittites, the new state of Phrygia and Lydia stood strong on the western coast as Greece civilization began to flourish. They and all the rest of Anatolia were relatively soon incorporated into the Persian Empire, more from the east. A new power emerged. Persia grew in power more and more and influenced the lands of the west. Expanding in Anatolia, their system of local government in Anatolia allowed many cities and ports to grow and to become wealthy because of the influx of trade and road networks between the east and west. The region of Anatolia was divided into various regions, satrapies, ruled by satraps, governors, appointed by the Central Persian rulers. In the early 5th century BC, some of the Ionian cities under Persian rule revolted, which culminated into the Ionian cities under Persian rule revolted, which culminated into the Ionian revolt. This revolt, after being easily suppressed by the Persians, led to the popular Greco-Persian Wars, one of the most known and crucial wars from the ancient history. This Greco-Persian War led to more conflicts in the Greek peninsula. Fights for power and influence happened, and a revenge sentiment mixed with good leaderships led to the growth of Macedonian kingdom under Philip II and his son Alexander the Great, who gained control of the whole region and conquered Persia in successive battles. From this point, Anatolia was more and more influenced by the Hellenic world. After Alexander's death, his conquests were split amongst several of his trusted generals. The Seleucid Empire, the largest of Alexander's territories, and which included Anatolia, became involved in wars with Rome more years later. The rise of Rome was felt across the Mediterranean basin. The control of Anatolia was strengthened by Rome, allowing local control to govern effectively and provide military protection. Expanding deep into Anatolian territory. The territory here developed in Roman times. Due to the rise of instability in the empire and the permanent raids from foreign invaders in the 4th century AD, the Emperor Constantine the Great established a new administrative center at the city of Byzantium, called Constantinople after his name. And by the end of the 4th century, the Roman Empire split into two parts: the western part with Rome as its capital, and the eastern part with Constantinople as its capital. An empire referred to by historians as the Byzantine Empire. The process of Hellenization that began with Alexander's conquest accelerated under Roman rule, and the ancient Greek language and culture was predominant in the region. Turkic peoples and related groups migrated west from Turkestan and what is now Mongolia towards Eastern Europe. Iranian Plateau and Anatolia, the Seljuk Turkmens created a medieval empire that controlled a vast area, stretching from the Hindu Kush to eastern Anatolia and from Central Asia to the Persian Gulf. Many wars, the emerging of new empires, migrations, raids, and the incompetence of some leaders created the slow process of the Byzantine decline throughout time. Their decline and the growing power of the Seljuks led to conflicts and to the famous Battle of Manzikert on 26th of August, 1071, which is believed to be the open gate for the Turkic people, which will come in Anatolia in the next decades and centuries. This important battle was fought between the Byzantine Empire and the Seljuk Empire near Manzikert. The defeat of the Byzantine Empire in the capture of their emperor, Romanos Diogenes IV, is an important chapter in the history of Anatolia and in the history of what will be known as the Ottoman Empire and the Republic of Turkey. The Sultanate of Rum seceded from the Great Seljuk Empire, and they ruled central Anatolia. As the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum started to crumble, many other smaller regions emerged. Ruled by different leaders, these small kingdoms were called beyliks. One of them was ruled by Osman, which will be known as Osman, the founder of the Ottoman Empire. It's believed that Osman's early followers consisted both of Turkish tribal groups and Byzantine renegades, but not all were Muslims. It is not known for sure how this beylik started to dominate the region. But one thing was sure: the Byzantine Empire was very vulnerable. The new empire expanded into Europe, defeating local leaders and taking profit from the instability of the region. By the year 1400, the Ottomans were a true power, having control of much of the Balkans and western Anatolia. The collapse of Constantinople in the year 1453 and the end of the last vestiges of the Roman Empire consolidated their power and their notoriety for the next centuries, in which the empire will expand even further, reaching its peak in the 16th and 17th centuries. Inflations, lost battles, the defeats against the Russians in the Habsburgs, and some crisis and rebellions marked the decline of the Ottomans. The start of the 19th century was marked by national movements. Many people from different ethnicities lived in different empires or administrative forms, and rebellions started to happen. The Serbian Revolution, 1804-1815, marked the beginning of an era of national awakening. Also, even some Arabs, led by the Al-Saud family, revolted against the Ottomans. In 1821, the Greeks declared war on the Sultan, achieving independence. In 1830, the French invaded Algeria, which was lost to the empire. In 1831, Muhammad Ali revolted and created a civil war with the aim of making himself sultan. As we can see, the Ottoman experienced huge instability, marked by defeats, bad administration, revolts, and national movements across the empire due to its overextensions on lands with different peoples and cultures. The empire continued in the next years of the 19th century to lose wars and territories and to fail in the creating of new reforms. The collapse of the empire is a more detailed subject, but if you want to know more about that, we already made a more detailed video about their collapse. At the start of the First World War, the Ottoman Empire was at its final days, joining the Central Powers in the conflict after their defeat. The empire crumbled, and many of their territories were conceded in favor of Greece, Italy, Britain, and France. This loss created the start of the Turkish national movement, which will be known as the Turkish War of Independence, led by Mustafa Kemal. By September 18, 1922, the occupying armies were expelled. On November 1st, the newly founded parliament formally abolished the Sultanate, thus ending 623 years of Ottoman rule. The Treaty of Lausanne of July 24, 1923, led to the international recognition of the sovereignty of the newly formed Republic of Turkey as the successor state of the Ottoman Empire, and the Republic was officially proclaimed on October 29, 1923, in the new capital of Ankara. Mustafa Kemal became the Republic's first president of Turkey and subsequently introduced many radical reforms. More rights for women were established. A new writing system in the Latin alphabet for the Turkish language was created, and many others. Turkey was neutral in World War II, and they refused German requests to allow troops access to its borders into Syria or the USSR due to the growing tensions of the Cold War. The US guaranteed the security of Turkey and Greece. Turkey joined NATO in 1952, an important member, especially due to its geographic position at the border with USSR. On the island of Cyprus, instability and conflict started to exist, and a military coup of July 1974, overthrowing President Makarios and installing Nikos Sampson as a dictator. Turkey invaded the Cyprus in 1974. Later, the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus was established, but just Turkey recognizes it. The single-party period was followed by multi-party democracy after 1945. The Turkish democracy was interrupted by internal problems and by military coups in 1960, 1971, and 1980. Since the liberalization of the Turkish economy during the 1980s, The country has enjoyed stronger economic growth and greater political stability. Also, a boom in population happened in this country, growing from 17 million people in the 1930s to over 80 million today. The history of the Philippines. The history of what is today the Philippines started with the arrival of its first humans. It is believed they used rafts or boats around 60,000 years ago, with groups of diverse people settling in the archipelago. Some of these groups started to develop and expand into bigger settlements, and in the next thousands of years, they evolved into what some scholars believe to be considered early states, Austronesians, and afterwards, speakers of the Malayo-Polynesian languages began to arrive in successive waves beginning about 4000 BC. According to the existing evidence, a jade culture existed on these lands, starting with the Neolithic era. By 1000 BC, it is believed that the inhabitants of the archipelago had developed into 4 distinct kinds of people: tribal groups, warrior societies, the pettit plutocracy, and the harbor civilizations. Also important to note is the fact that the metallurgy reached the archipelago due to trade with India around 300 to 700 AD. The seafaring people of the islands began to trade with the Indianized kingdoms in the Malay archipelago and the nearby East Asian principalities, adopting influences from both Buddhism and Hinduism. Some cultures of present-day Vietnam showed evidence of an extensive trade network. Artifacts and goods were traded, such as glass, agate, or gold. There were also other items present in the region which were most likely imported, including ear ornaments that have been found in archaeological sites in the Philippines, Thailand, and Taiwan. The Indian culture influenced the Southeast Asian region starting with the 1st century. During the period of the South Indian Pallava dynasty and the North Indian Gupta Empire, Indian culture spread to Southeast Asia, and it reached the Philippines, which led to the establishment of new kingdoms largely influenced by the Indian culture and traditions. The date inscribed in the oldest Philippine document found so far, the Laguna copperplate inscription, is 900 AD. From the details of the document, written in Kawi script, the bearer of a debt, Namwaran, along with his children, is cleared of a debt by the ruler of Tondo. This is the earliest document that shows the use of mathematics in pre-colonial Philippine societies. A standard system of weights and measures is also demonstrated by the use of precise measurement for gold and other items, as well as in astronomy. From the various Sanskrit terms and titles seen in the document, the culture and society of the Manila Bay were that of Hindu Old Malay amalgamation, similar to the cultures of Java, Peninsular Malaysia, and Sumatra at the time. In the years leading up to 1000, there were already several maritime societies existing in the islands, but there was no unifying political state encompassing the entire Philippine archipelago. Instead, the region was divided into numerous semi-autonomous city-states under the rule of the plutocracy. While a number of states existed alongside the highland societies, these smaller structures alternated between being part of or being influenced by larger Asian empires like Maya Pahit around 1225. The nation of Mai, a Buddhist pre-Hispanic Philippine island state centered in Mindoro, flourished, attracting traders and shipping from the kingdom of Ryukyu to the Empire of Japan. Chao Jukhwa, a customs inspector in Fujian province, China, wrote the description of the barbarous peoples, describing trade with this pre-colonial state. Its people were noted for their honesty in trade, Much of what is now Indonesia was ruled by the Hindu Majapahit Empire during the 1300s. This empire ruled over Luzon Island and the Sulu archipelago. As more and more influence was on these islands, skirmishes and battles also existed. Some local tribes were waging incessant guerrilla warfare against them. Eventually, the kingdoms of Luzon regained independence from Majapahit after the Battle of Manila, 1365. Sulu also re-established independence, and in vengeance, assaulted the Majapahit province of Brunei before a fleet from the capital drove them out. The start of the Islamic era in Indonesia set the collapse of the Majapahit, as its provinces eventually seceded and became independent sultanates. In 1380, Makhdum Karim, an Arab trader born in Johor, arrived in Sulu from Malacca and brought Islam to the Philippines. Additionally, Sharif ul Hashim, an Arab Muslim explorer, established the Sultanate of Sulu by converting its previous ruler, the Hindu king Raja Bagwinda, to Islam and then marrying his daughter. The Sultanate of Maguindanao rose to prominence at the end of the 15th century. Meanwhile, the religion was introduced to the area by Muslim missionaries and traders from the Middle East, Indian, and Malay regions who propagated Islam to Sulu and Maguindanao. As before, when Buddhist and Hindu cultures influenced the archipelago, the same case happened with the Muslim culture. Upon the secession of Brunei from the Majapahit Empire, they imported the Arab emir from Mecca, Sharif Ali, and became an independent sultanate. The new religion started to grow roots in the Philippines through conquest and conversion of local leaders in the next decades. Moreover, Islam was further strengthened by the arrival to the Philippines of traders and proselytizers from Malaysia and Indonesia. In 1521, the Spanish reached the archipelago through the expedition around the world led by Portuguese-born Spanish explorer Ferdinand Magellan. Claiming the islands he saw for the Spanish Empire, he established friendly relations with some of the local leaders and converted some of them to Roman Catholicism. Because the Philippines are a large archipelago, the Spaniards started to explore many islands. However, the explorer Ferdinand Magellan was killed during the Battle of Mactan against the local ruler Lapu-Lapu over the next several decades. Other Spanish expeditions were dispatched to the islands. In 1543, an expedition was led to the islands, naming them the Philippines, in honor of Philip of Austria, who became Philip II of Spain on January 16, 1556. The name was then extended to the entire archipelago later on in the Spanish era. European colonization began in earnest when Spanish explorer Miguel el Pez de Legazpi arrived from Mexico in 1565 and formed the first European settlements in Cebu. Through diplomatic and military annexation of some lands incorporating local states, including the Kingdom of Tondo, the Spaniards established Manila as the capital of the Spanish East Indies. In 1578, the Castilian War erupted between the Christian Spaniards and Muslim Bruneians over control of the Philippine archipelago. The Christian troops were so diverse due to generally being made up of people under the Spanish rule, including Native Americans, namely Aztecs, Mayans, and Incans, who were gathered and sent from Mexico and South America to be led by Spanish officers that had worked together with native Filipinos in military campaigns across Southeast Asia. The Muslim side was also very diverse, though. They were supported by the Ottoman Empire, with their troops consisting of Malay warriors and expeditionary forces sent by the Ottomans, which included mainly Turks, Egyptians, Swahilis, Somalis, Indians, and others. The conflict ended with a status quo antebellum just 20 years after the conquest of Luzon. Remarkable progress existed in the work of colonization of the islands and the spread of Christianity. A cathedral was built in the city of Manila with an episcopal palace. Other monasteries and churches were built across islands, and more people started to convert to Christianity. Furthermore, Spanish and Mexican families settled in the new lands, creating stronger communities. Much of the archipelago came under Spanish rule, creating the first unified political structure known as the Philippines. Spanish colonial rule saw the introduction of Christianity, the Code of Law, and the oldest modern university in Asia. The Philippines was ruled by the Mexico-based Viceroyalty of New Spain, and after, the colony was directly governed by Spain. Many of the local people revolted in the next centuries due to some abuses made by the Spanish authorities. Their rule ended after the American-Spanish War at the end of the 19th century in 1898. The Philippines became a territory of the United States. The United States then established the insular government to rule the Philippines. In 1907, the elected assembly was set up with popular elections. The U.S. promised independence in the Jones Act to the country, and the Philippine Commonwealth was established in 1935 as a 10-year interim step period to full independence. But before gaining total freedom, in 1942, during World War II, the Philippines was occupied by Japanese forces. By 1945, the U.S. liberated the Philippines, and the Treaty of Manila in 1946 established an independent Philippine Republic. The period of their independence was marked by internal skirmishes and a smaller period of dictatorship, but also huge progress and development, with Manuel Roxas becoming the first president of the Independent Republic of the Philippines. The United States seceded its sovereignty over the Philippines on July 4, 1946, as scheduled. However, the Philippine economy remained highly dependent on United States markets. Roxas died suddenly of a heart attack in April 1948, and Vice President Elpidio Quirino ruled the country until 1953. Some communist partisans existed in the islands, but were defeated in the 50s. Additionally, an important event happened in the middle of the 1960s. Ferdinand Marcos took power in 1965 and ruled until 1986. This era included the final years of the Third Republic from 1965 to 1972, and the Philippines under martial law 1972 to 1981. His reign was marked by dictatorship and instability. In 1986, Ferdinand Marcos was removed from power and replaced by Maria Corazon Aquino. Up to the present day, 5 other presidents ruled the Philippines. History of Malaysia. The history of Malaysia is as interesting as the nation's geographical form. From BC times to modern day, Malaysia has been a place of immigration, colonization, wealth, nationalism, trade, and so much more. Positioned right above the equator in 2 land masses separated by a span of the South China Sea, and boasts a population of roughly 32.7 million. But where did it all begin? While we do not know exactly how long ago human life came to the region, we do know that in the 1950s, a human skull was found in the Malaysian state of Sarawak that dates back to around 40,000 years ago. The next hypothesis of when civilization began in the area comes about 10,000 years ago, or 8,000 BC. There is debate as to who these people were or where they originally came from, but some anthropologists speculate that they may have traveled from China initially to Indonesia, Sumatra, and then Borneo. Either way, these proto-Malays were eventually forced into more remote pockets of the locale, as new migrating peoples believed to be the direct ancestors of the modern-day ethnic Malays came in and pushed them out to the north. A few hundred years BC, the influence of both China and India became apparent as trade began with the neighboring territories, and the religions of Buddhism and Hinduism made their way into the Malaysia region. The local form of writing also took on a heavy influence from India, with Sanskrit being adopted as the new writing system when the 7th century came around. The Srivijaya Empire from Sumatra took control of a large part of the contemporary Malay Peninsula, predominantly along the coasts. The ruling trade-based empire gained power and prosperity through their trade success with China and India, which was made easily accessible by the possession of the Malacca Strait, giving them easy access to the Indian Ocean from the South China Sea. The Srivijaya Empire's control remained steady until their supremacy peaked and started to decline in the 11th century. By the 13th century, they had lost all reign over the region and were replaced by a new type of monarchy, one run by Iskandar Shah, Prince Iskandar Shah, thought by some scholars to also be known as Parameswara, founded the port of Malacca, which became an integral piece of the Malay territory. By this point, trade between Malacca, the Chinese, Indians, and now Arabs continued to grow, and the Islamic faith spread through the realm. Experts are conflicted as to whether Iskandar Shah or Paramuswara actually converted to Islam or not during this time. Either way, many people within the area began to convert, whilst the rulers throughout the Malaysian peninsula dominated trade across the sea between China and India, and Malay became the new official language. The 16th century brought about a new type of challenge for the existing powers of the region. As Malacca and its surroundings caught the attention of the Portuguese, intrigued by the trading powers' success and affluence, and led by Alfonso de Albuquerque, the Portuguese successfully captured Malacca in 1511. As Albuquerque told his men, Portugal wanted to seize Malacca because of the opportunities it allowed for Muslims to trade with other nations, which the Portuguese wanted to put an end to, claiming that they would be doing their lord's service. Although Albuquerque's expedition was victorious, the Malaccan Sultan managed to found a new kingdom known as Johor. As this new state grew, it also became an increasing threat to the Portuguese in Malacca. At first, Johor's attempts to retake Malacca were frustratingly ineffective. The Portuguese remained in control, and it was not until the Dutch began to show interest in Malacca that Johor's luck changed for the better. Near the mid-17th century, in a battle that left many dead and followed two previous failed endeavors in 1606 and 1608, the Dutch East India Company, aligned with the Sultanate of Johor, were finally able to expel the Portuguese and capture Malacca for the Dutch, per an earlier agreement made between the two powers. The Dutch took full authority over Malacca, but left the other Malayan sultanates alone. Johor went on to stand as a leading influence in the region until the assassination of its sultan, Sultan Mahmud, in 1699. After that point, the command of contemporary Johor declined, eventually being overshadowed by a new people within its borders, the Bugis. At first, no significant issues arose until 1777, when a man by the name of Raja Kasil, supported by the Bugis, aimed to take the throne of Johor under the claim that he was the son of the murdered Sultan Mahmud. The presiding Sultan, Abdul Jalil, had taken the place of the late Sultan Mahmud, but was unable to maintain his reign in the face of this unforeseen challenge. Raja Kasil and his adherents took the capital city and chased Abdul Jalil out to the east coast of the peninsula. From his new settlement, Jalil established his own court opposing Qasim's rule and professed himself to once again be the true Sultan of Johor. In retaliation, Sultan Qasim directed the execution of his rival, and Abdul Jalil was subsequently murdered. Qasim's victory was not as sweet as he likely anticipated, though, because shortly after his adversary was assassinated, the Bugis people began to turn on the remaining sultan. In a complete reversal of favor, they astonishingly aided the son of Abdul Jalil and eventually placed him on the throne, deposing Raja Qasil and securing Bugis dominance in Johor. During the same century as the unrest in Johor, the economic status of Malaya as a whole was also shifting, with growing trade participation from China, India, and Arab nations. The British were becoming progressively involved in the region as well. By the late 18th century, the Brits increased their involvement in the Malayan Peninsula through the British East India Company, going as far as to seize the state of Penang in 1786 and creating a capital, Georgetown, for their new possession, focused predominantly on building trade through the peninsula. Britain later seized Province Wellesley in 1800 and set up another trading post at the tip of the landmass in Singapore. Over the next couple of decades, the Dutch and the British both worked to maintain a hand in the affairs of the Malayan Peninsula, leading to the signing of the two Anglo-Dutch treaties in 1814 and 1824 that helped to split up the region's territories between both colonial powers. As part of the latter agreement, the Dutch handed Malacca over to the British. Following these developments, the population throughout Malacca, Provincial Wesley, and other Anglo-Dutch-controlled territories on the Malayan Peninsula began to skyrocket. Chinese and Indian immigrant workers flooded the region as other power struggles unfolded. In 1821, Siam, or modern-day Thailand, launched an incursion into the Malayan state of Kedah and overthrew its sultan. It took repeated uprising for the sultan to finally be restored to his throne as the Siamese dominion was reduced, leaving Kedah as only a vassal of Siam. Meanwhile, the Brits later took authority of Sarawak in 1841. In 1853, Britain ceased charging duty on all imports of tin, which, along with the Suez Canal opening in 1869, triggered a surge of Malayan exports of tin to Britain. Between those events, the trading post known today as Kuala Lumpur was founded in 1857. Over the next few decades, Britain increased and spread their control throughout the peninsula and outside of it. The region's economy prospered until the Great Depression of the 1930s, at which point exports rapidly decreased and immigration into the Malayan territories had to be restricted in order to combat the level of unemployment. At the start of World War II, Japan invaded the Malayan Peninsula and overpowered the unprepared British troops and quickly occupied the region. By the end of 1942, tensions between the native Malays, Chinese, and Indians grew during the Japanese occupation, which lasted until 1945, when the British were able to recapture their Malayan possessions. By 1946, nationalist movements such as the establishment of the United Malays National Organization grew enough to prompt the founding of the Federation of Malaya, a unity of the formerly British-controlled Malayan states that would go on to gain their independence from the Brits in 1957. 6 years later, in 1963, the British colonies of Sarawak, Singapore, and North Borneo decided to join the Federation, forming the new nation of Malaysia. Though Singapore was originally a part of this coalition, it was pushed out in 1965 due to political disagreements with the Union. In 1969, the young nation faced a state of emergency when violent riots broke out in Kuala Lumpur after a strained election that spring. Celebrations by the winning party were met with counter-protests by the losing party, setting off deadly clashes between the opposing groups and prompting Parliament to be suspended. Finally, in 1971, Parliament was reconvened and Malaysia eventually adopted a new economic policy that allowed the nation's economy to flourish, eventually growing by a rate of 8% each year. Over time, Malaysia turned itself into a successful industrial country that is still prosperous today. And while it continues to grow and face ups and downs as history of Indonesia. Today, Indonesia is probably most commonly known around the world for one place, Bali, an exotic and romantic vacation spot. So many people view Bali as the representation of Indonesia as a whole, but what about the rest of the nation? How did that one island and the rest that make up the entirety of Indonesia come to be what they are now? Where did the history of Indonesia begin? Like its neighbor of Malaysia, Indonesia can trace its first signs of modern human life all the way back to about 40,000 years ago, although there is also archaeological evidence suggesting that 40,000 years may be an underestimate, and other ancestors of today's humans may have been present in the region as long as 9 million years ago. Either way, the earliest reliable evidence of a sophisticated civilization in current-day Indonesia dates back to only about 400 BC, with the discoveries of Indian trade goods in the region and inscriptions found in West Java and eastern Kalimantan. It is also believed that trade with China would have been concurrent with the trade between the Indonesian archipelago and India. Commerce with these particular foreign nations would have also brought the religions of Buddhism and Hinduism to the islands, beginning or contributing to the outside influence on the region. Jumping ahead to the 7th century, the powerful trade-oriented Srivijaya Empire, originating from the island of Sumatra, flourished from the Malay Peninsula down to Java. Despite their remarkable success over multiple centuries, the Buddhist empire of Sriwijaya faced its decline after the Chola Empire from India seized their Sumatran territory of Palembang and apprehended their king in 1025. From that point on, the Sriwijaya Empire essentially collapsed, making room for the Hindu kingdom of the Majapahit Empire. Founded in 1292, the Majapahit Empire rose to dominate the modern-day Indonesian region throughout the 13th and 14th centuries, prospering through trade as the Sriwijaya Empire had done before them. Still, just as their predecessors, the Majapahit Empire hit a wall and began a rapid downfall. Theirs came after the death of one of their leaders, Gajah Mada, in 1364, and the following death of the king Hayam Wiruk in 1389. Leading up to this time, the Islamic faith found its way to the archipelago and began to really take hold over the ensuing centuries. Many different lesser-known sultanates found success throughout the islands as a result, some even outlasting the dominion of the Majapahit Empire, as these kingdoms continued to grow trade in and out of the region. European powers became attracted to the spice market that it offered. The first of such nations to arrive in modern-day Indonesia were the Portuguese and the Spanish in the 16th century. While Spain did attempt to exert some dominance in the Maluku Islands, also known as the Spice Islands, their authority in any part of the Indonesian archipelago was short-lived due to contesting efforts of Portugal and later the Dutch and British. The Portuguese were initially triumphant in the Malay Peninsula, capturing Malacca in 1511. From there, they aimed their sights towards the Spice Islands, beginning their bid to take control of the spice trade in 1512. While they had some levels of success, They were fairly quickly pushed out through the arrival of the Dutch by the 17th century. In terms of the colonial powers, the Dutch were surely the most prominent intruder into the Indonesian islands. The first Dutch expedition set off for the archipelago in 1595 under the command of Cornelius de Houtman and dropped anchor at the shore of West Java. Around this time, the Dutch East India Company was formed in order to control trade between the Dutch Republic and the nations throughout the Indian Ocean. The Dutch East India Company was given a significant amount of autonomy by the Dutch government, allowing them to dominate trade throughout the East Indies and keep their competitors, notably the British and Portuguese, at bay. While the original focus of the company was to maintain commercial authority and prosperity, they began to shift their attention as they took control of Java and its neighbors. During the 17th century, the Dutch East India Company made a gradual transition from a leading sea and trading power to more of a colonial-type establishment after centering themselves in the fortified port of Jakarta, Batavia, or modern-day Jakarta, working to gain more jurisdiction throughout the Indonesian islands. The Dutch East India Company was also able to capture Malacca from the adjacent Malay Peninsula in 1641. When the 18th century came around, though, the company began to struggle with corruption, conflict, and a slow collapse into bankruptcy, which resulted in the Dutch government revoking their charter and seizing all of their possessions in 1799. In 1800, the Dutch East Indies was founded, made up of what would later become Indonesia, but for the time being, served as the new Dutch colonial administration in the archipelago. This establishment grew over the 19th and part of the 20th century. Although some ups and downs, such as the Javanese War from 1825 to 1830, ending in a Dutch victory, did exist. Also, in 1825, the Dutch captured Palembang, the former territory of the Sriwijaya Empire. During this period, the Dutch also settled disputes and clashes with Aceh, Lombok, and Sulawesi, and continued to expand their dominion. In the course of the Dutch colonization, the people of the Indonesian islands were treated vastly unfairly. As Dutch priorities shifted more towards agriculture, the local farmers were mandated to set aside 20% of their own property in order to grow crops for the Dutch to export, such as pepper, sugar, cinnamon, tea, and coffee, and indigo. By the 1870s, the colony moved to a free market system and began to form private plantations, although the local people were still not truly treated justly. Finally, at the very start of the 20th century, the Dutch installed a new system in order to promote the welfare of the archipelago's locals, known simply as the ethical policy. This new program brought about changes such as the construction of new schools in the region, government reforms that allowed more autonomy for the local officials, and the opportunity for some of the indigenous people to become more educated and learn more about the Western world. Even with these improvements, though not every local was impacted, and therefore many people on the island still felt oppressed by the colonial authority, over time, these feelings of resentment culminated in nationalist movements and a push for ultimate independence. Unfortunately, for the people of the archipelago, the fight for freedom was swiftly interrupted by the intrusion of the Japanese during World War II. At first, the locals were not completely displeased by what they saw as a liberation from their Dutch oppressors. When the Japanese occupation of the region began, they were quick to win favor from the Indonesian people, doing so through their use of natives for administrative positions. Unlike the Dutch and their willingness to support Indonesian nationalists, the successful strategy was only temporary, though, as the Japanese opted to use the Indonesian islands in whatever form best suited them during the war. which drew some disapproval from a number of locals. Still, the relationship between the Japanese and natives was not horrible, and as the Axis power began to face defeat in the World War, they threw their support even further behind the Indonesian independence movement. During the latter half of 1944, the Japanese declared their goal of creating a self-governed East Indies, which was later confirmed in August of 1945, when Teruichi Hisaichi, commander of Japan's Southern Expeditionary Army Group, summoned Muhammad Hatta and Sukarno, two Indonesian independence movement leaders, and informed them that Japan intended to make an immediate transfer of independence. The two nationalist men announced Indonesia's independence, declaring it an independent republic. One's word was out of the Japanese surrender to the Allied forces on August 17, 1945. The proclamation of an independent republic was not quite so simple, though, and sparked a series of clashes between the Indonesians and the colonizing forces of both the British and Dutch. The British were less compelled to fight back, eventually withdrawing as the Dutch stepped in to try and retake their former possession. After repeated failures, unsuccessful police actions, and growing condemnation from the far west, such as the US, at long last in the final weeks of 1949, the Dutch recognized Indonesia as a sovereign state. The following years marked a time of political and constitutional development, accompanied by agricultural and economic ups and downs as well, beginning first as a parliamentary democracy, subsequently following what then-President Sukarno called a guided democracy. Started in February of 1957, the republic then fell into the hands of a dictator, former General Suharto, in 1966, before finally returning to a democracy as of 1999. Today, Indonesia is still growing and developing as an independent nation, and an overall population of roughly 273.5 million people in 2020. The Republic of Indonesia is now led by their seventh president, President Joko Widodo of the PDIP, or Indonesian Democratic Party of Struggle. The history of Thailand. The history of Thailand has a bit of a foggy beginning. It is not certain when people first came to the region, but fossils of Homo erectus were found in the northern province of Lampang that can be dated all the way back to at least 500,000 years ago. Another location has gifted archaeologists with some of the world's oldest evidence of an agrarian society. Additionally, we do know that consistent inhabitation of the area could potentially date back 10 to 20,000 years and around 3000 BC. The Korat Plateau was likely home to bronze workers and farmers, based on archaeological evidence that has been found. The kingdoms of Khmer and Mon began to form in the vicinity of modern-day Thailand. These kingdoms served as a notable influence on the culture of contemporary Thailand, as did some of the other peoples who began to show up in the area over the following centuries. By the mid-7th century, the Thai people of Nan Chau were migrating to the mainland of Southeast Asia and began to settle under the dominion of the Khmer Empire. In 1238, Sri Intraditya, a chieftain of the Thai people, formed a new kingdom at Sukhothai and declared independence from the Khmers. The people of this new kingdom became known as the Thais, a word that fittingly means free. These new Thais wanted to separate themselves from the other Thai people who still remained under the control of foreign kingdoms. Throughout the following centuries, the Sukho Thai kingdom began to grow and extend its rule across the region of today's Thailand, creating vassal states across Burma, Laos, and the Malay Peninsula. The leaders of this monarchy were known to be kind in comparison to others, and created impressive diplomatic relations with foreign powers such as that of the Yuan dynasty in China, unfortunately for the Thais. Though the kingdom began to fall apart, from that point on, Sukhothai's vassal states began to abandon them, and the monarchy was unable to recover before the newly founded Ayutthaya kingdom inserted themselves into the equation. In 1378, the Sukhothais were initially forced to surrender to their opposition. By 1438, not even a full century later, the former Great Kingdom became fully absorbed by the Ayutthayas. The Ayutthaya kingdom first came about in the 14th century, around which time the city-state of Ayutthaya was founded. In 1350, to be exact, the Ayutthaya kingdom quickly erupted into the leading power of the region. But its structure differed from some of its adversaries. The Ayutthayas ran under a system of self-governing principalities and provinces, which were headed by members of the royal family who maintained loyalty to the king. The king, in turn, was an absolute monarch and would spearhead the kingdom's political and economic expansion over the centuries, surpassing their predecessor of the Sukhothai kingdom. The Ayutthaya kingdom was eventually able to force the long-reigning Khmers into submission before turning their attention outward. By the start of the 16th century in 1511, the Ayutthayis received their first diplomatic mission from Portugal, who wished to develop a trade relationship with the local Thai kingdom, since the Portuguese had just captured Malacca from what is now Malaysia. Creating a solid trade agreement with the surrounding states proved to be vastly beneficial for both parties. In the 16th century, multiple trade treaties came to fruition, first between the Ayutthaya kingdom and the Portuguese in 1516, and then another between the Ayutthayas and the Netherlands in 1592. Through the following years, the Thai power sent diplomatic missions to Paris and The Hague, in addition to developing commercial ties with the British and the Japanese. Relations between the Ayutthaya kingdom and the Western powers were quite positive and advantageous until the consensus among the Thais did a complete flip. The locals began to fear the potential threat of the Western religion, especially following the arrival of missionaries from France, as well as disapproval of the arrival of English warships to the region. The following 150 years marked a time of intentional distancing from the West. Meanwhile, the Ayatollahs had fought multiple dynastic and local conflicts within their own kingdom, which eventually settled down, making way for what some historians refer to as the Golden Age. This period was marked by thriving art, education, and literature, and occurred during the latter half of the 18th century. The peace throughout the kingdom and blooming of the arts would sadly be cut short by the Burmese, who had contributed to some of the bloody local disputes prior to this golden era. In 1767, the people of Burma made a final successful attempt to seize the capital of the Ayutthaya kingdom. The city was absolutely destroyed, and the bordering areas were completely deserted. Structures and humans alike were laid to waste. The kingdom descended into utter chaos and eventually fell under the hand of a former military commander, Phra Taskin, who had escaped the siege of the capital, declared himself to be the new king, and moved the king's capital to Thonburi, which was just across the river and had better trade opportunities. Utilizing this advantage, Taskin promptly promoted Thai trade with China. While Taskin was triumphant in keeping the Ayutthaya kingdom from facing total destruction, he was still dethroned and executed in 1782 by a coup under the command of General Chow Phraya Chakri. General Chow now took the throne, styling himself as King Yot Fa, and was the first of the Chakri dynasty that still rules Thailand today. He had the capital moved once again, this time to what is now Bangkok. The state of the kingdom was known as Siam, and a strong focus was put on the political, cultural, and military rebuilding. This new wave of kings besieged the capitals of Laos and Cambodia, having already created trade treaties with the colonizing British and the United States. The Thais began to focus even more on forming favorable relationships with the enclosing Western powers, such as the British, US, and the French. Trade with the West skyrocketed and had a great impact on the Thai economy, now connecting it to the world monetary system. Still, foreign powers urged the current monarch, King Mongkut, to create a series of legal and administrative reforms in order to be seen as an equal by the West. The death of King Mongkut in 1868 complicated the matter, but the reforms did not come under the reign of Chulalongkorn near the end of the 1800s. The new king abolished slavery and the Corv system, created new European-style schools, formed a police force and standing army, updated the legal system, established a salaried bureaucracy, and essentially overhauled the entire of Siam's outdated policies. The first railway network between Ayutthaya and Bangkok was also opened. All of this was done with extensive advising from the West, most predominantly the British. While some anti-reformists were dissatisfied with the king's decisions, others regarded him as a skilled diplomat who was a genius in avoiding colonization by playing Western nations against each other and using them to his own advantage. Either way, as the British and French pushed their colonial efforts further, Siam was forced to give up some of their territory, such as in Laos and Cambodia, and in the northern Mall in exchange for maintaining independence. Continuing its positive relations with the Western powers, Siam joined the Allies and declared war against Germany in World War. As a result, at the end of the war, Siam received commending amendments to their treaties with France and Britain, took impounded German ships that would be used in its merchant marine, and was present at the Peace Conference of Versailles in 1919. Siam was also a founding member of the League of Nations. Post-World War I. In 1932, a bloodless coup led by a group known as Kan-i-Ratsadan, the People's Party, brought about the end of the absolute monarchy and replaced it with the first constitutional regime. The first parliamentary elections were held in November of 1933, shortly after. As World War II broke out, the Thai people collaborated with the Japanese, allowing them to pass through to the British-controlled Malay Peninsula and Burma. In January of 1942, the Prime Minister of Thailand agreed to a mutual defense pact with Japan, which included a declaration of war against Britain and the United States. Thankfully for the nation, in the end, the Thai ambassador charged with delivering the declaration to the U.S. government refused to do so. In 1944, the Prime Minister was forced to resign and was subsequently tried for war crimes. The following decades were filled with governmental uncertainty, as power was repeatedly passed between a democracy and military dictatorship after the resolution of World War II. Economic struggles ensued as well, namely the Asian financial crisis in 1997, and more political and governmental unrest continued. In 2017, after the crowning of Prince Vajiralongkorn as king, a new constitution was signed with its aim at finally bringing democracy back to, in 2017. After the crowning of Prince Vajiralongkorn as king, a new constitution was signed with its aim at finally bringing democracy back to the nation. The history of India. The history of India is filled with incredible stories of thriving civilizations, religions, and cultures, dating all the way back to the Paleolithic age. India's civilization is one of the oldest that we know and has played a part on the world stage for centuries and even still today. While it is impossible to truly capture all of India's history in one video, it still serves as a worthy topic to delve into. Evidence of cave paintings and stone tools have revealed that the first signs of human activity in India can be traced back to somewhere between 400,000 and 200,000 BC. Details concerning the civilizations inhabiting the region back that long ago do not exist, but we do know that one of the first sophisticated societies to walk the lands of India was the Harappan people, who likely existed throughout the first few thousand years BC. Positioned along the Indus River, the Harappan people had their own writing system, advanced social and economic system, and impressive urban cities and architecture. It is unknown why this civilization collapsed around 1500 BC, but some attribute their demise to the common floods and other natural disasters in the region, or potentially invaders from Western and Central Asia. The next known civilization to leave a mark on Indian history books was the Vedic Aryans. These people were initially migrants who spoke an early form of Sanskrit and were determined to stay true to their own tribal identity. The name they have been given, the Vedic people, comes from 4 sacred texts, or Vedas, that have presented researchers with a glimpse into the civilization's lives and beliefs. These Vedas are often considered to be the oldest Hindu scripts, and the Vedic civilization is believed to have spread their culture across a large portion of India by roughly 1000 BC. With them, the Vedic Aryans brought their philosophical beliefs. These ideas represent a theory that happiness and salvation come from a person's morals and ethics, and one's path should be based upon their place in life, but should always be righteous and good. The Vedic Aryans also shared their societal system as they extended their reach. This system was made up originally of 3 tiers: Brahmin or priest, Kshatriya or warrior, and Vaishya or commoner. The Aryans continued to spread their tribal settlements across India throughout the following centuries as their own civilization grew and flourished in both culture and trade. A series of 16 individual settlements or states spanned across northern India, including the Gandhara, Kosala, Kuru, and the Magadha. The latter particularly flourished under the rule of Chandragupta Maurya during the 4th century BC, as it began to expand and its leader grew his own authority and worked to form the Mauryan Empire, which is believed to be the first Indian imperial power. The Mauryan Empire established its capital in Pataliputra, near modern-day Patna, and constructed extraordinary temples, libraries, palaces, and even a university. The empire's trade success was impressive, and it maintained a remarkable governmental system and strong army by the time of the 3rd emperor, the grandson of Chandragupta. A stance of non-violence was taken after a bloody struggle against the kingdom of Kalinga due to the emperor's new Buddhist beliefs. Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, had been born in 560 BC, and by the reign of Emperor Ashoka, the religious system he had founded was becoming more and more prevalent throughout India. Potentially due to their unwillingness to participate in conflict, though, the Mauryan Empire eventually dissolved in the 2nd century BC after the last line of the Maurya line, Brihadratha, was murdered by his commander-in-chief, who would later found the Sangha dynasty in 185 BC. Despite the fact that Brihadratha's assassin, Pushyamitra, was rumored to have persecuted Buddhists, it appeared that Buddhism faced no decline concurrent with his rise to power. During Pushyamitra's reign, his kingdom maintained authority over a series of provinces as he stood his ground against other powers attempting to expand their territory towards his own after the monarch's death. Though his dynasty seemed to have fallen in terms of importance, the dynasty is not known to have done anything notably relevant, and their control was short-lived. A variety of settlements and invading powers controlled India at this time, one being the Kushana kingdom, known for their significant trade involvement with Chinese, Persian, and Roman empires along the Silk Road. One Kushana ruler, Kanishka, in the 1st century AD, also converted to Buddhism and helps to further the religion throughout the region. In 75 AD, the Kushana kingdom marked a new era, the Shaka era, a bit of distance from the Kushanas in the south. A handful of other powers rose, fell, and fought for supremacy amongst each other. The kingdoms of Satavahana, Chera, Chola, and Panja were some of the major authorities in the south during this time and through the Classical Age. The Gupta Empire became the face of northern India during the Classical Age, and the majority of the region was united under their authority during what is often described as northern India's Golden Age. The reign of the Gupta Empire is regarded as a time of law and order, as well as cultural flourishing. The rulers of the empire were no strangers to military expedition, but aimed to expand their territory through peaceful means, such as martial alliances, no less than through military action. Though the Gupta Empire had extensive success over centuries, they eventually reached a point of decline between the 5th and 6th centuries, as invading Huns from Central Asia began to annex and take over the formerly dominant empire's land. As the religions of Buddhism and what later became Hinduism thrived, local and trespassing authorities continued to fight for territory and dominion over the following centuries. The next major shakeup of the Indian civilization came with the arrival of Islam. Muslim invaders began to send missions to India the century after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. A series of Muslim sultans began to lead expeditions into India, claiming places such as Sindh, Multan, and Somnath. These incursions brought the defeat of native kingdoms and the destruction of Hindu temples along the way. The Rajputs stood as one of the most determined defenders against Sultan invaders, but they were ultimately defeated in 1192 by Muhammad Ghori and his forces. As Islam began to work its way into India, other previously principal religions, such as Buddhism, began to decline. By the start of the 13th century, the era of the Delhi Sultanate dominion arose. The first dynasty within the Delhi Sultanate was founded by Qutb-ud-Din Aibak. The slave dynasty controlled the Sultanate until around 1290, when the Khilji dynasty took over. First by the hand of Jahal-ud-Din Khilji, his family held the throne for less than a century, as the Tughlaq dynasty was next to seize power in 1320. The Tughlaq dynasty technically retained power until 1412. But matters were complicated by the incursion led by Timur in 1398 into Delhi. As the Tughlaq dynasty weakened, the Sayyid dynasty replaced them. Starting in 1414, the Sayyids lasted for roughly 37 years. But the last ruler's reign was stained by rebellion and discord as the dynasty fell from grace. Yet another dynastic authority took the open throne, this time being the Lodi dynasty. The new dynasty lasted until the death of the then current ruler Ibrahim Khan Lodi, who was killed in battle at Panipat by the army of Kabul's leader Babur in 1526. Ibrahim's death brought about the final end of the Delhi Sultanate, as a whole, now free of competition from the Lodi dynasty. Babur established the Mughal dynasty, which would end up becoming one of the greatest throughout history. The original Turkic-Mongol imperial power ruled a vast majority of India for over 2 centuries and brought about significant cultural growth and architectural achievements, including the great Taj Mahal. Despite their immense success, the Mughal Empire began its decline around the start of the 18th century, as revolt after revolt began to shake the foundations of the widespread power alongside threats from the Marathas and the British. The British East India Company had actually already been in the region for some time, but the situation with the British started to escalate not long after the Mughals fell. By 1857, India displayed increasing control by the East India Company, and the locals were having none of it. What began as a simple revolt by Indian soldiers in Meerut quickly blew up into a widespread rebellion and became known as the Indian Mutiny of 1857. This rebellion later would be called the First War of Indian Independence. And even though the British were able to quell the revolt after a matter of months, it inevitably had lasting impacts. In response to the mutiny, on November 1st, 1858, Britain's Queen Victoria declared that India would be ruled in the name of the British Crown from that point on. Locals maintained their disapproval and anger at the British supremacy over their land, and nationalist sentiments and movements were far from extinguished. The next major move towards independence came when Mahatma Gandhi and the Indian National Congress decided to withdraw all cooperation with the British government, beginning the non-cooperation movement following the end of World War. When this strategy did not bring the wanted results, Gandhi adopted a new technique in the form of the civil disobedience movement in December of 1929. Essentially, the movement was made up of the declaration of an Indian Independence Day that would be celebrated on January 16th and complete disobedience of any orders by the British government. Again, Gandhi's strategy failed, and this time he was even arrested, while many other rebels were murdered. Still, the British were eventually pushed into the Round Table Conferences beginning in November of 1930, the second of which Gandhi attended. The conferences marked another failure, and civil disobedience reignited Gandhi's next attempt. The Quit India movement again made no drastic progress. World War II brought about new issues as India was forced into war by the British. But at the conflict's conclusion, a new Labour Party came into power in India and showed sympathy towards the fight for independence. India's modern history consists of war, rebellion, independence, and all that comes along with the establishment of a new nation, from world wars to independence, from the British to the Indo-Pakistan Wars. A lot has happened for the young sovereign state in the past century. When World War I broke out, India was still under the British Crown and was, therefore, an automatic contributor to the Triple Entente's war efforts. Over 1 million Indian troops joined the fight, making the Indian Army one of the largest armies involved. In the Second World War, India sent over 2 to 5 million troops to fight under British command. While India itself was not really in a position of authority during these wars due to their contemporary lack of independence, both events were still a notable part of the country's join the fight alongside Britain. This video was sponsored by The Great Courses Plus. Because I like to create videos about history, I seek to know more about this topic every day. But regardless of your passions, learning new things should be an important goal in life. The Great Courses Plus is a subscription on-demand video learning service with top-notch courses from top professors from great universities and other experts to though the clicking on my link in the description and subscribing to the Great Courses Plus. Though the Allies won World War II, the effects of the conflict were impressively damaging for the British Empire. Agreements with the United States led Britain to begin decolonizing many of its territories and paved the way for India's independence movement to be accelerated. On June 3, 1947, the last British Governor-General of India, Viscount Louis Mountbatten, declared the partitioning of British India into India and Pakistan, and the nations became their own sovereign states by August 15th of the same year. This break from the British Crown gave both countries the choice of staying in or leaving the British Commonwealth. But in 1949, India chose to stay. By this point, Jawaharlal Nehru had become independent India's first Prime Minister after serving as the leader of the Indian National Congress prior to 1947. The Deputy Prime Minister was Vallabhbhai Patel, who played a significant role in teaming up with Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru during the independence movement. Under his and Prime Minister Nehru's watchful eyes, a dramatic population exchange occurred between the Hindu majority of India and the Muslim majority of Pakistan. In addition to the First Kashmir War between the young neighboring nations, the first of 4 Indo-Pakistani conflicts, the Kashmir War, was a conflict over the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, and lasted from 1947 through 1948. While the provinces of Bengal and Punjab were to be divided between the newly formed India and Pakistan, the fate of Jammu and Kashmir was still unsettled, and Pakistan, anticipating the dissension, decided to mobilize tribal militia groups from Waziristan a few weeks before the war actually broke out. The reason why Jammu and Kashmir's destiny was so uncertain was due to the fact that the princely state was led by a Hindu Maharaja, but was made up of a Muslim majority. There was heavy pressure from both sides to accede to either India or Pakistan. But some citizens of the state were even considering a push for complete independence from both countries. Tensions boiled over at the start of October 1947, when a pro-Pakistani tribal rebellion in Kashmir broke out, and the Pakistani troops quickly came to their aid. Pakistan's goal was to seize the capital, Srinagar, within the first weeks of their arrival. Eventually, the Maharaja called on India for military assistance, and India agreed, under the condition that Kashmir become part of India. The state's Prime Minister and Maharaja both accepted, and the instrument of accession was signed on October 26, 1947. Still, Pakistan and their tribal allies were unwilling to give up the fight. Combat continued until December of 1948, and there didn't seem to be an easy solution without major reinforcements and aggressive action from the Indian side. Desperate for a resolution, India approached the United Nations for support, and a ceasefire between India and Pakistan was reached with the UN's help on January 1st, 1949. The same year, other princely states such as Manipur and Tripura also acceded to India, and the nation's constitution was close to being established. In November of 1949, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and his committee drafted the official constitution of India, which would come into effect and turn the country into an independent democratic republic on January 26, 1950. And Dr. Rajendra Prasad would become the first president of the republic. The first democratic elections were held in India in 1951 through 1952 over a 4-month span, and brought a turnout of over 60%, re-electing both Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru and President Rajendra Prasad for second terms. During Nehru's second term, many reforms and legislative changes were made, and a Soviet-inspired 5-year plan was composed for the economy. Rights for women in Hindu societies were increased. Caste discrimination was condemned with new legislation, and school education was encouraged. Nehru also appointed the States Reorganization Commission, which led to the passage of the States Reorganization Act in 1956. Many state borders were rearranged to create a better separation of linguistic and ethnic majorities as part of this decision. Many other milestones were reached during this time as well, including the launching of an atomic energy program in 1954. India's first computer being installed in 1955, foreign policy under Nehru involved the co-founding of the non-aligned movement, maintaining friendly relations with both the US and the Soviet Union. Despite this more neutral stance, though, India decided in 1961 to invade and annex Portugal's colony of Goa after repeated unsuccessful petitions for a peaceful transfer. The following year, the Sino-Indian War between China and India briefly broke out due to a dispute over the Himalayan border. But a ceasefire was unilaterally declared by China only a month after the conflict began. There was a short span of peace, during which Prime Minister Nehru passed away on May 27, 1964, and was succeeded by Lal Bahadur Shastri. In 1965, India was again into war with Pakistan over the state of Kashmir. No notable changes were made by the warfare, and a ceasefire was eventually pushed on both sides by foreign powers who feared escalation. The Tashkent Agreement was signed by India and Pakistan on January 10, 1966, and had been mediated by the Soviet Union. Mysteriously, Prime Minister Shastri died the night after the agreement was signed. Either way, the Prime Minister's untimely death resulted in Indira Gandhi, the daughter of Nehru, taking Shastri's place. In the next year's election, the Indian National Congress Party won fewer seats than they had in the past, likely due to the growing unemployment, economic stagnation, and rising prices brought about by the party's leadership so far. The Prime Minister's political advisor came to the aid of her reputation, however, and advised a shift towards more socialist policies, including the slashing of the Privy Purse Agreement, which gave payments to ruling families of the former princely states as part of their original deal to accede to India back in 1947. Prime Minister Gandhi's other decisions, including major attacks on the Congress Party's hierarchy and the subject of nationalizing the nation's bank, earned her increased popularity amongst the masses. Gandhi won re-election in 1971 and had now obtained an even larger majority, which only grew further as a result of her decision to intervene in the Bangladesh Liberation War, bringing about the Third Indo-Pakistani War. The conflict resulted in the freedom of East Pakistan, now known as Bangladesh. India also increased its involvement in world affairs, signing a 20-year Indo-Soviet Treaty of Peace, Friendship and Cooperation in August of 1971. Aligning with the Soviet Union and adding strain to its relationship with the United States. In 1973, a rebellion broke out in the Kingdom of Sikkim, led by anti-royalist rioters who wished to abolish the monarchy. After 2 years of discord, Sikkim's Prime Minister reached out to India's government with an appeal for Sikkim to become an Indian state. The offer was taken, and the Indian army made their way to Gangtok in order to get some control in the region and disarm the Sikkim Palace Guards. A referendum was then held, showing a 97.5% favor for putting an end to the monarchy and integrating into India. On May 16, 1975, that wish became a reality, making Sikkim the 22nd state of the Indian Union. While India grew, Prime Minister Gandhi's popularity now took a downward spiral as allegations of corruption from the people. Indira Gandhi's power was at risk as her opposition from all sides came together to protest the Prime Minister's accused dictatorship. She eventually advised President Ali Ahmed to declare a state of emergency in order to give her additional powers and the ability to suspend the civil liberties of their citizens under the guise of maintaining law and order. State and national elections were also postponed, and almost 1,000 members of the opposition were thrown into prisons, protests being banned indefinitely, while the economy was actually improving by the lack of political unrest and new productivity. The government was continuously accused of corruption and abuses of power, making it no surprise that Indira Gandhi and her Congress Party were routed in the 1977 general elections by the Janata Party. Morarji Desai became the new Prime Minister. Then, Charan Singh became the 5th Prime Minister in 1979 as the Janata coalition fell into disarray. Singh's interim government was replaced in January of 1980 by Indira Gandhi and her Congress Party once again. Although after a rise in tensions and violence in the Sikh community of India following Operation Blue Star and the raid of the Golden Temple, which was being used by rebellious Khalistan militants as a hideout, Indira Gandhi was assassinated by her own Sikh bodyguards in 1984. Anti-Sikh riots erupted in Delhi, and thousands of Sikhs perished as a result. Members of Congress were accused of inciting the violence, but the party was fairly unfazed and moved on to choose Rajiv Gandhi, Indira's eldest son, as her replacement. Under Rajiv's administration, Parliament was dissolved in 1989. The Congress Party gained a 415 to 545 majority, and many reforms took place, as well as improved relations with the United States. Prime Minister Rajiv had a mostly flawless reputation, known by the press as Mr. Clean, until a scandal was unearthed, revealing that a weapons contract between India and Sweden provided kickbacks from the Swedish arms dealer for multiple politicians on both sides, including Rajiv Gandhi himself. The Congress Party's popularity plummeted once again, and Singh became the next prime minister after the 1989 elections. More governmental unrest followed, until Narasimha Rao took power in 1991 and made sweeping economic and political reforms, while the Bombay riots and other Hindu-Muslim conflicts exploded across India. New corruption stripped most support from Rao's administration and party, and they were humiliated at the next election by the Bharatiya Janata Party. Under this party's new leadership, relations with the U.S. greatly improved, and the American President Bill Clinton made a visit to India to promote the relationship even further. Attempts were also made to create more friendly ties with Pakistan, but a failed summit in 2001 brought about no real change. Today, India is still a developing nation with almost 1.4 billion people and so many ethnicities. While the history of India is rich and vast, the independent nation is still growing into the history of Pakistan. Through history, the territory inside the borders of Pakistan witnessed large civilizations, wars, development, religions, and reforms. In this video, we will advance rapidly through some important events that existed here. Modern humans are thought to have arrived on Pakistan between 73 and 55,000 years ago. Settled life, which farming and pastoralism started around 7000 BC. People worked in agriculture and in domestication of animals like goats, sheep, or cattle. By 4500 BC, settled life had become more widespread, and in time evolved into the Indus Valley Civilization. One of the earliest civilizations, Indus Valley Civilization, as well as ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, was noted for developing new techniques in handicraft, metallurgy, development. It's believed to be the first civilization to use wheeled transport in the form of bullock carts and also used boats. The route which traversed the Indus Valley, linking the Central Asia, the Indian subcontinent, and the Orient, have attracted people from far places. In the beginning of the second millennium BC, climate change with persistent drought led to the abandonment of the urban centers of the Indus Valley civilization. Its population resettled in smaller villages and mixed with Indo-Orient tribes, who moved into other areas of the Indian subcontinent in several waves of migration. Also driven by the effects of this climate change, the Vedic period, 1500 to 500 BC, as Indo-Aryans migrated and settled into the Indus Valley. Along with them came their distinctive religious traditions and practices which fused with local culture. The initial early Vedic culture was a tribal, pastoral society, centered in the Indus Valley of what is today Pakistan. During this period, the Vedas, the oldest scriptures of Hinduism, were composed. The Vedic tribes remained in the Indus Valley by 6th century BC. These tribes fought against one another and were vulnerable against possible outsiders or invasions. King Darius I of the Achaemenid Empire took advantage of the opportunity and planned for an invasion. The Indus Valley was a major objective for the Persian Empire, and other earlier incursions and campaigns existed in the Indus River. In 518 BC, Darius led his army through the Khyber Pass, eventually reaching the Arabian Sea coast in Sindh by 516 BC. Under Persian rule, a system of centralized administration with a bureaucratic system was introduced into the Indus Valley for the first time. Provinces or satrapy were established with provincial capitals. Also, there is no archaeological evidence of Achaemenid control over these regions, as not a single archaeological site that can be positively identified with the Achaemenid Empire has been found anywhere in Pakistan. We know about the easternmost satraps, and the borderlands of the Achaemenid Empire is set in Darius inscriptions and from Greek sources. In 328 BC, Alexander the Great, at that time, king of Macedonia, king of Persia, and pharaoh of Egypt, had conquered much of the former satraps in the Achaemenid Empire up to Bactria. When Alexander died in 323 BCE, he left behind an expansive empire stretching from Greece to the Indus River. The empire was put under the authority of Perdiccas, and the territories were divided among Alexander's generals. Due to the internal conflicts of Alexander's generals, Chandragupta and his Brahmin counselor Chanakya saw an opportunity to expand the Mauryan Empire from its Ganges plain heartland in Bihar towards the Indus Valley between 325 BCE to 303 BCE. Mauryan Empire incorporated today's Pakistan and far beyond in today's Afghanistan. It collapsed around 180 BC, and the Shunga Empire started to exist, but not near the Indus Valley. Here, in Alexander's campaigns, many Greeks established in this part of the empire, creating communities and influencing the region with their culture. The Indo-Greek kingdom expanded beyond the Hindu Kush. Their territories covered Panjshir and Kapisa in modern Afghanistan and extended to the Punjab region, with many tributaries to the south and east. The Greek and Indian languages, culture, traditions mixed, creating a very interesting period for this land. Sakas migrated from southern Central Asia into Pakistan from the middle of the 2nd century BC to the 1st century BC. They replaced the Indo-Greeks. Indo-Parthian and Kushan empires ruled the lands here in the 1st centuries AD. By the end of the 3rd century, the Sassanid Shahanshah, Shapur Furs, had incorporated the Indo-Iranian borderlands into the Sassanid realm. The Gupta Empire was an ancient Indian empire existing approximately from 320 to 600 and covered much of northern South Asia, including some parts of modern Pakistan. Having its border with the Sassanid Empire in the Indus Valley across Indus River, this period is very important. Great accomplishments and great cultural developments took place during the reigns of important leaders. As an example, we can give the literary epics such as Mahabharata and Ramayana. This structure collapsed due to internal and external factors, like loss of territories, invasions, and instability. The Indo-Hephthalites were a nomadic confederation in Central Asia during the late Antiquity period. They were defeated by an alliance of Indian rulers. Brahmin dynasty existed in the region of Sindh between 632 and around 724. In this territory, here were many other small states in the next centuries. Another important period of this land is expansion of the Arab caliphates. A large expansion happened in the 7th century. After conquering the Middle East and the Sassanid Empire, Arab forces had reached the Indus Valley. Muhammad bin Qasim conquered most of the Indus region for the Umayyad Empire during the time of Arab caliphates. A gradual conversion to Islam happened as the new religion spread more and more. Also, Arabic and Persian languages spread and influenced the region. Ghaznavid Empire and then Ghurid Empire ruled for centuries over the Indus Valley and beyond. By doing so, the new culture and religion was embraced by more and more people, becoming dominant in time. The Delhi Empire was a sultanate based in Delhi that stretched over large parts of India, ruling over the largest rivers here and also deep in India's territory. This sultanate was ruled by 5 dynasties: Mamluk, Khalji, Tughlaq, Sayyid, and Lodi. During and in the Delhi Sultanate, the emergence of the Hindi-Urdu language started to happen. There was a synthesis of Indian civilization and that of Islamic civilization, and the further integration of the Indian subcontinent with a growing world system and wider international networks spanning large parts of Afro-Eurasia, which had a significant impact on Indian culture and society. Mongols attacked the region between the 13th and 14th centuries. Timur invaded the Punjab region and sacked cities at the end of the 14th century. The First Battle of Panipat was fought between the invading forces of Babur and the Lodi kingdom. It took place in North India and marked the beginning of the Mughal Empire and the end of the Delhi Sultanate. This was one of the earliest battles involving gunpowder, firearms, and field artillery in the Indian subcontinent, which were induced by Mughals in this battle. The early modern period started with the Mughal Empire. Mughal rule was briefly interrupted by the Sur Empire. The religion of Sikhism originated during this era in the Punjab province of Pakistan. Mughal rule was the time of economic development, prosperity, and peace for Pakistan, which remained nearly 2 centuries and also the golden age of the region. They're responsible for spreading Urdu and built many masjids, mausoleums, madrasas, sand forts in Pakistan. The period was marked by economic activity, excellence in painting, and magnificent architecture. The Mughal dynasty greatly influenced the art, architecture, culture of today's Pakistan. During the decline of Mughal in the late 18th and early 19th century, the other dynasties invaded and then controlled the region. Over these lands ruled the Durrani Empire, the Marathas, and the Sikh Empire. Most of the territory of modern Pakistan was occupied by the East India Company of the British Empire. A series of conflicts followed in the region, in which the British fought local rulers, Sikhs and Afghans. Pakistan became part of British rule later than other parts of South Asia, and it stayed this way until the 14th of August, 1947, when Pakistan gained independence. The two provinces of British India, Punjab and Bengal, were divided along religious lines. Violence and conflicts existed between the Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims, and millions migrated to the new borders and some exchanges of population. The dispute over Kashmir escalated into the First War between India and Pakistan. Constitution in 1956 led to Pakistan declaring itself an Islamic republic with the adoption of a parliamentary democratic system of government. Another conflict with India will happen that took place between April 1965 and September 1965. Economic grievances and political disenfranchisement in East Pakistan led to violent political tensions escalating into a civil war. Then another conflict with India. Pakistan was defeated in the war, and this led to the Bangladesh independence. Between 1971 to 1977, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto creates an Islamic socialist system. In 1977, after a coup, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto is executed. The Islamic law is imposed, political crises, new elections, and instabilities existed until this day. Also, an important fact of the period of modern Pakistan is their population boom. If in this region lived 35 million when they achieved independence. By 1990, here lived around 100 million, and today more than 200 million people. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell button to learn more about our incredible history. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next episode.